So welcome back to the channel, and in this lecture here we're going to be discussing the Loft feature and how to create planes using AutoCAD, right? So that's going to be something that's going to be super important to when you're using the Loft command, right? So the reason I combine these two together is because anytime you do a Loft, what we're talking about is having multiple profiles on different elevations or planes. And the reason I'm using the word elevation is because when we discussed the one about AutoCAD, there are no planes and things of that nature. We have to put them at different elevations, okay? So that's what we're going to be discussing in this video. If this is something that you're going to be interested in, please stick by, and remember that it's going to be in all three of these softwares that I typically use, which is going to be AutoCAD, Solidworks, or Inventor. Alright, so far what we've discussed is how to use the extrude command. And remember, the extrude command is really simple. We need to have some kind of profile, and preferably a closed profile, and we need to have a direction to send it, or a vector, right? So we need to have those two things, and typically when it comes to the extrude command, we're going to be extruding a direction that is typically normal to whatever the plane that we created in. And all that fancy word normal means is just that it is perpendicular to it. Okay. Now, the other things that we discussed was the revolve command. Remember, the revolve command, you need two things. You're going to need that profile again, and all of this is going to be common amongst all of them. We're going to need a profile, and then we're going to need an axis of revolution. Okay. So that's going to cover the extrude command. We got the revolve command, and then the sweep gets a little bit more complex, right? With the sweep command, we're going to still need that closed profile, but we're going to have to give it a path. And here is the Loft command. So these are the four probably most commonly used features that you can create any 3D design with. So it's just only four of them, and these are going to be the tools that you're going to use. Now the Loft feature, what makes it or set it across differently from everything else is that it has to be on different elevations, okay? So different elevations, different planes, and things of that nature. So what we're going to try to discuss, and what I'm going to show you here, is that it's easy to create these at distances and at angles, and I'm not going to really show you a good example of a Loft command. I do have some examples where you can go and take a look at some Loft commands, and you're going to also see there's going to be one thing common amongst all of them, and hopefully you should pick that up as we go along through this lecture here, and I'll also recap it at the end. Okay, so what we want to discuss first is what's a Loft command, right? So this is one of those that we're going to create a three-dimensional shape. Now, the one thing I want you to remember here is that it's going to be multiple profiles, right? So we got to create multiple profiles. Everything we've done so far is on one profile. Those profiles have to be on different planes. And I know I'm kind of, repeating myself constantly, but it's going to be, that's kind of the way your mind have to think of it. So I have to create these profiles, and they have to be on separate planes or separate elevations. What you're going to see is that it can make some really cool shapes. So if you want something to transition from a circle to a triangle back to a square, you can do that using the Loft command, as long as you have them on different elevations. Now, when it comes to doing some Loft, sometimes the shapes will be a little bit, and I trying to use a better term here, but lofty. It'll be kind of puffy. What we're going to have here is we're going to have some guides or some paths if you really want to stiffen it up. And I'm going to try to remember to link a video up here that I've done in AutoCAD, and it'll show you that. And it's going to be a C-clamp. And it might be one of your examples if you're going to go and take a look at them, but it's going to be a C-clamp. And in that one, I will use the guide to make it kind of stiff around the edges. So that's what that guide is going to be for. But that's going to go across all three of these programs. All right, so the first one we're going to discuss is going to be AutoCAD. So the AutoCAD user interface is going to look like this. We typically see that the Loft command is going to be underneath this extrude. And then you would think that I would do a section plane or something of that nature, but this is something that is totally different. So remember that the Loft command, we don't have really planes located in this program here. So we're going to use the Loft command, and I'm going to show you how to make a couple of profiles. We have to do this by either manipulating the UCS. We can also use the gizmo, or we can use the move and rotate commands. And what I mean by move and rotate command is that there are 3D move and rotate commands inside of AutoCAD. And lastly, we do have that transition where we can add those guides and curves, right? So once again, I'm going to reiterate that guides and curves because you're going to see that that is a common theme amongst all of them. And like again, I say it's kind of hard to give you a lot of examples on lofts and stuff of that nature, but look around through the channel and I'm sure you can find all kinds of good examples of when I use the loft command. All right, so now from here we're gonna just switch over to AutoCAD, and I'm just gonna show you how we're gonna manipulate some profiles in order to get it to do what we want it to do. Okay, so here in AutoCAD, what I'm doing is just starting off with a block, right? Now, I could have created this block any form or things of that nature, but if I wanted to create something else on here, if I want another angle and then I want to extrude into this, you can see that I can only create things on the X and Y axis. So you have to understand that that's going to be the most important thing. So if I kind of zoom out a little bit, and then if I just go ahead and put a regular rectangle here, you're going to see that it's going to create that rectangle along the X and Y. So if I have a profile like this, I can use some manipulation tools in order to get this to act right. The easiest one by far is going to be the rotate gizmo. So if I select here and I use the rotate gizmo, and remember, the only way you can use this is if you're out of the wireframe. You cannot be in 2D wireframe and use your gizmos. So if I have this gizmo turned on, I can go ahead and rotate this at an angle of 45, right? So I can come back. For some strange reason, it wouldn't let me pick the gizmo. Let's go ahead and select here. And then I'm trying to select the green axis here. And then you can see that I can manipulate this and I can type in 45, right? So now this is at a 45 and I'll go ahead and move this. Just using the regular move command. And let's go ahead and place this endpoint, or midpoint I should say, along that midpoint. And so from here I can kind of extrude this going through, or if I had a loft or I had it on a different plane, I can do that as well. Another thing that you can do, and I'm just going to go back and put another rectangle here. And if I wanted to kind of create these at a different plane, maybe I want to put a circle on the inside of this, and I'll go ahead and use a 2-point circle. And I'm just going to go from here to here, right? And I wanted to put this on a different elevation. So I can just use the regular move command, or I can also use these move gizmos, right? So I can just go ahead and select it there and go ahead and move it here. And then we can go ahead and manipulate the other one with a copy command, right? So let's go ahead and use copy. Go ahead and select here and go ahead and move that up. And then from here, I can loft those shapes together. So just remember that the most important thing is that they have to be on different elevations, and you can see that. Another thing, what it also mentions is that I can use this UCS and kind of manipulate it. So if I know that I have something that I want to send at a 45 degrees, and you're seeing that my X and Y is here, I'm just going to come here and I'm just going to grab the Y flip, and I'll grab it here. And what this is going to do is allow me to type in an angle. Go ahead and type in 45 degrees. You can see that that's where the X and Y is. And now when I go ahead and create my profile, it's going to automatically be on that 45 degrees, right? Let's go ahead and set this back to the world coordinate system. And then if I take a look at this from the front, you can see that that line did go at a 45 degrees. So that's kind of what you see when you're doing some kind of angle manipulation and things of that nature. Another thing that I also mentioned was you do have 3D commands. So you can see when I start typing in 3D, I have a 3D rotate command and I have a 3D move command. But by far, they're a lot easier to use just with your gizmos. Okay, so that's going to be kind of how you're going to manipulate and create planes here using this program here. So if I wanted to create a loft, remember I have to create those profiles separately. And then I have to, kind of start stacking them on top of each other. And if I want to create a plane at an angle, I'm going to have to use some kind of rotation tool. Okay, so the next program that we're going to discuss is going to be Inventor. Now, Inventor does have that dedicated plane, and it's also going to have the loft command. Now, the loft command is located here. Super simple to find. And the plane is going to be here. One thing that I do like about Inventor is that it shows you all of the options that you can use to manipulate and create a plane. And I'll show you that here in a second when we switch over to it. Once again, common theme is going to happen here is that if we're going to use the loft command, they have to be on different planes and at different elevations. Okay, so that's what's going to help make that transition. And that's kind of all of this is what it's going to keep reiterating, is that most of your lofts, or actually all your lofts, are going to have to be on different planes, and it's going to have to be at a different elevation or at a different angle. Okay, or sometimes even both. And you're going to also have that option to use a guide rail here at the bottom. Okay, so what we're going to do next is going to switch over to Inventor, and this is going to be super easier and simpler to do than what you've seen me do there in AutoCAD. Okay, so here in Inventor, nice and easy for us. If I wanted to create a plane on top of here, and what I was telling you about this is that if I select the drop down, it will give you all of the options that you can use to create a plane. Now, you can do this also in Solidworks, but it's just not as straightforward as this. This has it all labeled and things of that nature, so you can create what you want. Now, up here at the top is a catch-all, right? So this is the one that'll kind of predict what you want to use, and for 99.9% of the time, that's going to be the one that I use, right? I've never had to make something that was so complex that I had to actually come down here and make it. But if we're just going to create just simple planes here, and the two most common ways to do it is to create a plane at a distance and to create one at an angle. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the plane, and then in order to create a plane off of this, all I have to do is left click and hold and start dragging up. Once I do that, it's going to start giving me a distance, and if I'm happy with that distance, I can go ahead and hit the OK button, and it created that plane. You can also manipulate that if you come back to here and then you go to edit edit dimensions. You can come back and change this, right? So I said, okay, that's fine. If I want to create another plane off of here, I can left click and hold and drag off of it, right? So there I have created two planes basically off of that face. If I wanted to create one at an angle, and this is going to be common as well as in SolidWorks, what you're going to need is that you're going to need a face, whether it be an existing plane or an existing face, and you're going to need some kind of axis. What I'm telling you here is that if I want to create a plane at an angle, I'm going to select this face, and then I'm going to select this axis here, and you can see that it gives me a line there at an angle. Okay, so there's my one that I have. Let me go ahead and delete that. It didn't show me the actual angle. Let's go ahead and come back to here and to here, and there is the angle. And I can actually kind of play with this a little bit. So I can kind of, pull this around, and then I can determine where do I want this to stop at. So I can type in that number and say, hey, 40 looks good to me. As I was mentioning, you can also do this with some of your existing planes. So I can go in my origins and I say, hey, I want to create a plane off of my origin. I can select the plane command. I can go find this origin here, and then I'm just going to drag it away. Let's see if I can get to the point, and then I can just drag it away off of here. So we can manipulate planes however we want to, just depending on the face, or we can use our existing ones. Once again, it's going to be a common theme that you're going to also see in SolidWorks, since both of these platforms were built to be three-dimensional platforms. So a lot of the stuff that you're seeing me do here will be exactly the same as what you're going to see in SolidWorks. So the last program that we're going to be discussing here is going to be SolidWorks and how it deals with lofts and planes. Same thing is going to apply here, except for SolidWorks hide the plane command under a different tab. I wish they made a button that was right out in the open, but it's going to be located right here underneath the reference geometry. So you're going to select the drop down, and that's where you're going to get your option to choose a plane, an axis, or a point, or some of that stuff, right? So that's what we're going to define that at. And also remember that here inside of the SolidWorks command, we have two lofts, depending on what you want to do. If I want to make a loft and make a three-dimensional shape, it's going to be my loft base. If I want to cut one, it's going to be a loft cut. So I have two different options here that I have to do that. In Inventor, remember that it's all going to be underneath the loft command, whether I want to join or cut. It's just two options that are sitting there at the bottom inside of that dialog box. But in here, in SolidWorks, we are going to have them separately. Okay? We're going to create different profiles on different elevations, and once again, we are going to have that guide to make it go around and stiffen it up. All right, now let me go ahead and demonstrate a little bit of how to create some planes here using SolidWorks. Okay, so here in SolidWorks, underneath the reference geometry, I'll have to go here and select plane, and then over here is where I'm going to do all of my work at, right? So I'm going to select this face here, and once I select it, it's going to automatically say, hey, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to give it a distance? If I don't want to give it a distance, I can simply select here, and you can see I can give it an angle, right? So I can kind of manipulate this how I want to. Now, what it's waiting on, if I do an angle, is waiting on that axis. So remember what we've seen in Inventor is that I have to give it a second reference and say, hey, go off of that axis. And then once I do that, it'll say, okay, I can figure out a 30 degrees from that. But if we was just using the regular one of giving it a distance, I don't need this here. Let's go ahead and open that back up and delete that. And now it'll give me my distance back, right? So we have some other things we can do. We can make it coincidence or perpendicular and all of that stuff. As you can see, I can add some of those relationships to it. I can also flip it. So just in case I didn't want it to go up this direction, I can flip it here and it will send that offset going the other direction. So this alleviates you having to put in a negative value, right? So usually some people will put in a negative and go, okay, what it is. We can also divide it on the mid plane. So if I have two planes here, it will divide it and split it in between those two planes. And what I mean by that is if I select here at the bottom, you're going to see that it will go ahead and put a plane right here in the middle. So really simple and easy to use or to create these, but all you have to do is just really step through what the features are or whatever you're going to need it to do, right? So hopefully I kind of demonstrated how you can create one at an angle, which is super simple, and I'll do that really quick for you. At an angle, remember we have to give it a plane, and then we have to give it a second reference, which is going to be an axis. And from here, we could select the angle. It looks like I'm actually hitting too many buttons here. Once I select the angle, then I can go ahead and, tell it what angle I want it to be. The distance is going to be straightforward. Just simply go to it. Select the face, and this can also happen with your existing faces or existing planes here. So if I wanted to make one going from maybe the right plane here, I can automatically select that, and then I can put in the distance, and then it will create that plane at that distance. Okay, so this is going to be something that you're going to see in the examples, and it's going to be super useful, especially when we go to create the Loft command. Okay, so here's going to be the quick breakdown for it. Remember, in AutoCAD, when we're creating planes, we have to use the UCS manipulation, or we have to construct the geometry on a different angle or plane that we can kind of achieve what we want to do. In the Inventor, remember we have that nice tool that we can sit there and we can hit in the drop down, and it's going to show us all of those different options, but by far you can use the catch-all, and we do have a mid plane in that one as well. So I can select two planes and it will bisect and put a plane right in the middle of it. And then in Solidworks is going to be kind of hidden a little bit underneath, but you have to go to the reference geometry and then select the plane, and then from there it's going to be controlled over there in the feature dialog box. So depending on what you want, you're going to have to select those things according to whatever kind of plane that you're trying to create. And then lastly here, some of the best practices is always try your best to keep your profiles as simple as possible. That's going to help you out tremendously. When you're doing the Loft command, and this is one of the things I didn't mention, is that you do have to follow the Loft in sequence, meaning that you're going to have to follow the Loft. If you're starting at the bottom, go to the next one up above it and keep going and keep going and keep going. If you get out of order with them, it will create a different shape. Also, if you're using the Solidworks, it does matter where you select those planes at. So you're going to see in some of the examples that I do create a Loft in, is that I typically like to select the actual, I would say the actual sketch out of the design tree, as opposed to actually picking on the sketches inside of my graphics area. And mainly because it will try to give a twist to it, or depending on where you select that. So you have to be really careful with that I find that when I'm using that in SolidWorks. Okay, always create your planes, understand what you're trying to create, and things of that nature. And that's what it's trying to discuss here by use your planes intentionally. So just depending on what you want to create, you're going to set it up that way. And then and all of them should give you a preview of how the Loft is going to be. And if you need it to stiffen up, here's that one thing that's common amongst all of them, is go ahead and use that guide curve, right? So remember, quick breakdown for it. AutoCAD does not have planes, but we have to put them at different elevations and manipulate the UCS. The other two are going to work exactly the same. There's planes, there's a loft command that you can use to do that, and all three of them are going to have those guides. Okay, so that's going to probably wrap it up for this video. I want to thank you for watching this, and hopefully this was informative to you. And my goal here for this video was hopefully that you understand how to create planes, just in case that you want to use the loft command, or if you got to create a profile or something on that nature, even for a simple extrusion at a different angle, right? So you have to know how to manipulate those using both, actually in all three of these programs. Okay, so thank you for watching this video. Hopefully you got something out of this. As always, keep drafting, and I'll see you in the next video.